The iron bars felt cold against Delilah Bennett's palms as she gripped them, staring out at the crowd gathered in the dusty street of Tropic, Utah. Their faces twisted with hatred and judgment. The marshal had arrested her 3 days ago for the murder of Samuel Crawford, the wealthy rancher whose body had been found in his study with a bullet through his heart, and Delilah's mother's silver locket clutched in his dead hand. That locket had been stolen from her room 2 weeks prior, but nobody cared about that detail. They saw a poor seamstress with motive, a woman Crawford had publicly humiliated when she refused his advances, and that was enough for them to paint her guilty before any trial could commence. The August heat of 1882 made the small jail cell feel like an oven, sweat trickling down her spine as she listened to the angry voices calling for her immediate hanging. Judge Henderson would not arrive for another 2 weeks, but Delilah wondered if she would live that long with the way the mob's fury grew each passing day. Her hands trembled as she moved away from the window, sinking onto the hard cot that served as her bed. At 23 years old, she had never imagined her life would end this way, condemned for a crime she did not commit, with no family left to mourn her since her parents had died from fever the previous winter. The jail door creaked open, and Marshal Dawson's heavy footsteps echoed through the small building. He appeared at her cell with a tin plate of beans and hardtack, sliding it through the gap at the bottom of the bars without meeting her eyes. Behind him stood a tall figure she had not noticed before, a cowboy with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "This is Preston Navarro," Marshal Dawson said gruffly. "He's been asking questions about the Crawford case. Says he wants to examine the evidence." Preston stepped forward, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty denim trousers, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips like he had been born wearing it. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and a stubborn set to his jaw that suggested he was not a man easily swayed once he made up his mind about something. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I know you didn't do it. I'll prove it." Delilah stared at him, convinced she had misheard. "What did you say?" "I said I know you're innocent." He moved closer to the bars, his gaze never leaving her face. "I've been tracking the real killer for 3 months now, following a trail of similar murders across Nevada and into Utah. Crawford was the 4th victim, all wealthy men shot in their homes with some personal item from a local woman left at the scene. You're being framed, just like the others were." Her legs felt weak and she gripped the bars for support. "The others, were they convicted?" Preston's expression darkened. "2 were hanged before I could reach them. 1 killed herself in her cell. I'm not letting that happen again." Marshal Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "Now hold on, Navarro. You can't just waltz in here and claim she's innocent without proof." That locket was found in Crawford's hand. Her locket. "A locket that was stolen from her room 2 weeks before the murder," Preston countered. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The real killer has been watching these towns, selecting his victims and the women he'll frame. He's careful, methodical. But he made a mistake in Silver Creek, Nevada. A shop owner saw a man breaking into a woman's room the night before that murder. The description matches a drifter who's been spotted in each town where these killings occurred." Delilah felt hope surge through her chest for the first time since her arrest. "You really believe I'm innocent?" Preston's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I don't believe it, Miss Bennett. I know it, and I'm going to prove it to this whole town." The marshal scratched his beard, considering. "Even if what you're saying is true, the judge won't be here for 2 weeks. That mob outside is getting restless. I can't guarantee her safety if they decide to take matters into their own hands. Then we have 2 weeks to find the real killer, Preston said firmly. I need access to Crawford's property, and I need to speak with anyone who saw strangers in town around the time of the murder. Marshal Dawson looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he sighed. You can investigate, but I'm not releasing her from this cell. And if you can't find proof before the judge arrives, she stands trial for murder. Fair enough. Preston turned back to Delilah, and something in his expression made her heart skip. I give you my word, Miss Bennett, I won't let them hang an innocent woman. After the marshal left them alone, Preston pulled up a wooden chair and sat facing her cell. Tell me everything about the 2 weeks before Crawford's death. Every detail, no matter how small it seems. Delilah settled onto her cot, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. Samuel Crawford came to my dress shop about 3 weeks ago. He wanted a suit tailored, said he had business in Salt Lake City. I took his measurements and told him it would be ready in 10 days. How did he behave toward you? Preston asked, pulling a small notebook from his vest pocket. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. He was inappropriate, made comments about my figure, stood too close. When I stepped back, he laughed and said I should be flattered that a man of his status showed interest in someone of my station. Preston's jaw tightened. Go on. When he returned for the suit, he asked me to have dinner with him. I declined politely, but he persisted. Finally, I told him plainly that I had no interest in his company. He became angry, said I was ungrateful, and that I would regret rejecting him. She twisted her hands in her lap. 2 days later, he came to the general store while I was shopping and announced loudly that I had tried to seduce him, and became violent when he rejected me. Everyone heard. People I had known my whole life looked at me like I was some kind of harlot. That must have been difficult, Preston said quietly, and the genuine sympathy in his voice brought tears to her eyes. I thought it would blow over, she continued. But then my locket went missing. I kept it in a music box in my room. I live above my shop and I always lock the doors, but when I went to put it on for church that Sunday, it was gone. I searched everywhere, thought perhaps I had misplaced it, but I knew I had seen it just days before. Preston made notes in his book. Did you report the theft? What would have been the point? After Crawford's accusations, half the town believed I was a liar and a seductress. The marshal would have thought I was making up stories. She wiped at her eyes angrily. Then Crawford was found dead, and they came for me immediately. The marshal said my locket in his hand was proof I had been there, that we had struggled, and I shot him. But you have no gun, Preston observed. I've never even held a gun. My father had a rifle for hunting, but I sold it after he died to pay for the burial. She looked at Preston through the bars, this stranger who had appeared like an answer to prayers she had been too desperate to even speak. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. He met her gaze steadily. I failed those other women. I was always one step behind, always arriving too late. Maybe I can't bring them back, but I can save you. And beyond that. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. From the moment I rode into Tropic and started asking questions, everyone told me what a terrible person you were, how you had seduced and murdered Samuel Crawford. But then I spoke to Mrs. Chen, who runs the boarding house. She said you had altered her daughter's wedding dress free of charge when they couldn't afford a seamstress. I talked to old Mr. Peterson, who told me you brought him meals when he was sick last winter. I heard about how you organized a collection for the Miller family when their barn burned down. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. The woman everyone described to me with kindness and affection didn't match the woman they claimed was a cold-blooded killer. So I looked at the evidence with fresh eyes and I saw the pattern. You're innocent, Miss Bennett, and I won't rest until everyone else sees it too. Delilah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the oppressive August heat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." Preston stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I'm going to Crawford's property now. Get some rest if you can. I'll be back tomorrow." As he walked away, Delilah found herself watching him go. This mysterious cowboy who had ridden into her nightmare with promises of salvation. She did not know if it was possible to fall in love with someone after one conversation, but she knew with certainty that Preston Navarro had just become the most important person in her world. The next morning, Preston returned with the marshal in tow, both men looking grim. Delilah sat up quickly on her cot, her heart pounding. "What did you find?" Crawford's study window had been forced open from the outside, Preston said. There were boot prints in the dirt beneath it, size 11 at least. The marshal here wears a size 10. He glanced at Dawson, who nodded confirmation. "Miss Bennett, what size shoe do you wear?" "Size 6, she replied, confused. "Exactly. The prints were fresh, made the night of the murder. They lead away from the house toward the main road, then disappear. But I found something else." He held up a small brass button. "This was caught on a splinter on the window frame. It's from a cavalry jacket, the kind they issued during the war 20 years ago. Lots of men still wear them, but it's distinctive." Marshal Dawson crossed his arms. "That's not enough to prove anything." "Could have been there for days." "Could have been," Preston agreed. "But it wasn't. I spoke to Crawford's housekeeper this morning. She cleaned that study 2 days before his death, and she's adamant that window was secure and there was no button. Someone forced it open the night he died." Delilah felt hope rising again. So someone else was in his house that night. Someone bigger than you, wearing an old cavalry jacket, who knew how to pick a lock and move quietly enough to catch Crawford unaware. Preston's eyes were bright with determination. The housekeeper also mentioned that Crawford had been nervous for several days before his death. He told her he thought someone was watching the house. She found a note slipped under the door 3 days before the murder. "What did it say?" Delilah asked eagerly. "Nothing specific. Just your sins will find you out. She threw it in the fire, thought it was some religious zealot. But I think it was the killer, letting Crawford know he was being hunted." Marshal Dawson rubbed his face tiredly. "This is all circumstantial, Navarro. The judge will want more than boot prints and a button. Then I'll find more." Preston turned to the marshal. "I need you to spread the word that you've got new evidence suggesting someone else was involved. Make it known that you're looking for a man, about 6 feet tall, wearing an old cavalry jacket. Let's see if we can shake loose some information." After the marshal left to make his announcement, Preston pulled his chair close to Delilah's cell again. In the morning light streaming through the window, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, marks of a man who spent his days squinting into the sun. He had a small scar on his chin and calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and long hours in the saddle. "Tell me about yourself," she said suddenly. "It seems you know everything about me, but I know nothing about you except that you're chasing a killer." Preston smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. "Not much to tell. I'm 28, originally from Texas. My father was a rancher until Comanche raiders killed him when I was 15. After that, I worked various jobs, cowboying mostly, drove cattle up from Texas to Kansas a few times. About 5 years ago, I was in Abilene when a woman was accused of murdering a saloon owner. Everyone was convinced she was guilty, but something didn't sit right with me. I looked into it, found evidence that proved her innocence. Turned out the real killer was the victim's business partner, who wanted to eliminate competition and frame someone convenient. "You saved her life," Delilah said softly. "I suppose I did. After that, I found I had a talent for seeing what others missed." Word spread, and people started seeking me out when they needed someone found or when something didn't add up. I've been doing this kind of work ever since." His expression grew somber. "But I've had failures too. Those 3 women who died before I could clear them, they haunt me. I see their faces when I close my eyes at night." Delilah reached through the bars without thinking, her hand extended toward him. Preston looked at it for a moment, then took it gently in his own. His palm was rough and warm, his grip strong but careful, as if she were something precious that might break. "You're a good man, Preston Navarro," she said. "I'm trying to be." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "I need you to know something, Miss Bennett. Even if I wasn't investigating this case, even if I had ridden into Tropic for completely different reasons, I think I would have found myself drawn to you. There's something about you, a strength and a kindness that shines through even in these terrible circumstances." Heat flooded her cheeks. "You're just saying that to give me hope. I'm saying it because it's true." He held her gaze, and she saw the honesty in his eyes. "When this is over and you're free, I'd like permission to court you properly. Take you to dinner, go on walks, let you get to know me without iron bars between us. Would you consider that?" Delilah's heart was racing now. "I would consider it very much." "But Preston, what if you can't prove my innocence? What if the judge finds me guilty regardless of what you discover?" His grip on her hand tightened. "That won't happen. I swear to you, Delilah, I will not let them take you from this world. You have too much life left to live, too much good left to do. And selfishly, I want the chance to know you better, to see if this feeling growing in my chest is the beginning of something real." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in days, they were not tears of despair. "I feel it too. Is that mad? We've only just met." "Maybe," he said with a soft smile. "Or maybe some people are meant to find each other, even in the darkest circumstances. My mother used to say that love doesn't follow a schedule or wait for convenient times. It arrives when it arrives, and you either embrace it or spend your life wondering what might have been." They sat there for a long moment, hands joined through the bars, 2 souls connecting across the divide of her imprisonment. Finally, Preston released her hand reluctantly. "I need to keep investigating, but I'll return this evening. Is there anything I can bring you?" "Books, better food. Just yourself," she said. "Your presence is comfort enough." Preston spent the next several days interviewing everyone in Tropic who might have seen something unusual. He talked to shopkeepers, ranchers, farmers, and travelers passing through. He examined every inch of Crawford's property, looking for additional clues. Each evening, he returned to the jail and sat with Delilah, sharing what he had learned and learning more about her in turn. She told him about her childhood, about learning to sew from her mother and helping in her father's shop. She spoke of her dreams to expand her dressmaking business, perhaps even open a proper boutique someday. He told her about his years on the trail, about sleeping under stars and waking to sunrises that painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to visit, the small joys and sorrows that made up a life. With each conversation, Delilah felt herself falling deeper in love with this man who had appeared in her darkest hour. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her, the determined set of his shoulders when he discussed the investigation. She loved his sense of justice, his refusal to accept easy answers, his willingness to fight for a stranger when no one else would. Preston was equally smitten, though he tried to maintain professional distance during his investigation. But he found his thoughts constantly drifting to Delilah, to the way lamplight caught in her auburn hair, the quick intelligence in her green eyes, the resilience she showed despite her circumstances. He admired her courage, her refusal to give in to despair. The kindness she showed even to the marshal who kept her locked up. On the 5th day of his investigation, Preston was interviewing the station master about travelers who had come through town when he noticed something interesting. A man matching the description from Silver Creek had purchased a ticket to Cedar City the day after Crawford's murder. The station master remembered him because he had paid in silver dollars, unusual for a drifter. "Did you notice anything else about him?" Preston pressed. The station master thought for a moment. He had a scar across his left eyebrow, looked fairly recent, and he was wearing an old cavalry jacket, buttons missing down the front. "I remember thinking he looked like he'd been in a fight." Preston's pulse quickened. "Did he give a name?" "John Smith." "Obviously fake, but I don't ask questions as long as they pay." Preston rode immediately to Cedar City, about 40 miles south of Tropic. It took him a full day of hard riding, and he pushed his horse as fast as he dared. In Cedar City, he checked hotels and boarding houses, showing a sketch he had drawn based on the station master's description. At the third establishment, a cheap rooming house near the edge of town, the owner recognized the image. "That's Jack Thornton. He stayed here for 3 nights, then moved on. Didn't talk much, kept to himself. Paid cash and was gone before dawn on the 4th day." "Jack Thornton," Preston repeated. "Do you know where he went?" Heard him talking to himself one night drunk. Something about heading to Colorado, maybe Denver. Said he had enough money to start fresh somewhere no one knew him. Preston felt frustration building. The trail was growing cold. But then the owner added, "He left some things behind in his room. I was going to throw them out, but haven't gotten around to it. You're welcome to look if you think it'll help." The items were sparse. A torn shirt, an empty whiskey bottle, and a small leather journal. Preston's hands trembled as he opened the journal, and what he found inside made his blood run cold. Page after page of notes about wealthy men in various towns, their habits, their homes, their vulnerabilities. Samuel Crawford was listed, along with details about his property and daily routine. But more damning were the notes about local women Crawford had wronged, with Delilah's name circled and the words "perfect scapegoat" written beside it. Earlier pages detailed the previous murders with the same cold calculation. Each victim had been a wealthy man with questionable morals, and each woman framed had been someone the victim had publicly wronged. The journal revealed a twisted sense of justice, a man who thought he was punishing evil men while simultaneously destroying the lives of their victims all over again. Preston also found something else in the journal's back pages: Jack Thornton's real identity. He was Jacob Thornton, a former cavalry soldier dishonorably discharged after the war for theft. His wife had died under suspicious circumstances in 1878, and though he was never charged, rumors had followed him ever since. The journal contained ramblings about proving he was smarter than everyone, about making the rich pay, about women who should be grateful for his service. With the journal secured in his saddlebag, Preston rode back to Tropic through the night, switching to a fresh horse at a way station. He arrived the next morning, exhausted but triumphant. He went straight to the marshal's office, where Dawson was just arriving to start his day. "I've got proof," Preston announced, pulling out the journal. "Solid proof that Delilah Bennett was framed." Marshal Dawson read through the journal, his expression growing darker with each page. "Sweet mercy," he muttered. "This man killed 4 people and destroyed 3 more lives just to satisfy some twisted idea of justice." "We need to wire the authorities in Colorado," Preston said urgently. "He's heading to Denver. With this journal as evidence, they can arrest him on sight." "I'll send the wire immediately," Dawson agreed. He looked toward the cell where Delilah waited, her face pressed to the bars. "Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology. I should have looked deeper into the evidence instead of accepting the obvious explanation." Delilah's eyes were fixed on Preston. "Does this mean I'm free?" "The judge still needs to make it official," Dawson said. "But yes, I'm releasing you from this cell right now. This journal proves you were framed, and I'll testify to that when Judge Henderson arrives." Preston waited as the marshal unlocked the cell door. Delilah stepped out on shaky legs, having been confined for over a week. She took 2 steps toward Preston, then her knees buckled. He caught her instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist to steady her. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe now." Delilah looked up at him, and the emotion in her eyes made his heart clench. "You saved my life. You actually did it. I told you I would." He helped her to a chair, kneeling beside her. "Jacob Thornton will be caught and brought to justice. You're free, Delilah, truly free." She threw her arms around his neck, and Preston held her close, feeling her body shake with relieved sobs. He stroked her hair, whispering reassurances, his own eyes stinging with tears. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he had fallen completely in love with this remarkable woman. The next days passed in a blur of activity. Word spread quickly through Tropic that Delilah had been innocent all along, and many townspeople who had condemned her now came forward with shamefaced apologies. Mrs. Chen brought her a proper meal. Mr. Peterson offered her a place to stay until she felt ready to return to her shop. The Miller family came with flowers and tears, thanking her for her past kindness and apologizing for doubting her. Preston stayed close by her side through it all, protective and supportive. He helped her clean her shop, which had been vandalized during her imprisonment. Together, they scrubbed away hateful words painted on the walls and replaced the broken window at the front. Delilah found strength in his presence, in the steady way he worked beside her without complaint. On the 3rd evening after her release, Preston took her for a walk along the creek that ran through Tropic. The sun was setting, painting the red rock cliffs surrounding the town in shades of orange and gold. They walked hand in hand, comfortable in their silence. "I received word today," Preston said finally. "Jacob Thornton was arrested in Denver. He resisted and was shot in the leg, but he'll survive to stand trial. The journal is being used as evidence against him for all 4 murders." "Those poor women who died," Delilah said softly. "They never got the chance I did." "No," Preston agreed, "but their families will finally have answers and closure. The women will be posthumously exonerated. It's not enough, but it's something." They stopped by the water and Preston turned to face her. "Delilah, I need to tell you something. This case is closed, and normally I would move on to the next town, the next investigation. But I don't want to leave Tropic. I don't want to leave you." Her heart soared. "I don't want you to leave either. I've been thinking," he continued. "I have some money saved. Not a fortune, but enough to start something. Tropic could use a proper lawman, someone who investigates properly instead of jumping to conclusions. I could offer my services, maybe set up an office here. That is, if you think you could see a future with a man like me." Delilah stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. "Preston Navarro, I fell in love with you in a jail cell when you were the only person who believed in my innocence. I've loved you more with each passing day. Yes, I can see a future with you. I want a future with you." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheeks. "I love you, Delilah Bennett. You're the strongest, bravest, kindest woman I've ever met. When I look at you, I see my future, my home, everything I've been searching for without knowing what it was." Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a tender meeting of lips that promised so much more. Delilah felt tears on her cheeks, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of love finally found in the most unexpected circumstances. Preston deepened the kiss, pulling her closer, and she melted against him, feeling safe and cherished for the first time since her parents had died. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "Marry me," Preston said suddenly. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Delilah. Let me spend my life proving every day that you can trust me, that I'll always protect you, that I'll love you until my last breath." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Tropic. Mrs. Chen stood as Delilah's witness, and Marshall Dawson stood for Preston. Delilah wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Preston wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut, his eyes never leaving his bride's face throughout the ceremony. Judge Henderson, who had arrived to formally clear Delilah of all charges, officiated the wedding. The town turned out to support them, the same people who had called for Delilah's death now celebrating her happiness. She found she could forgive them, understanding how easily fear and incomplete information could turn good people cruel. What mattered was that the truth had prevailed, that justice had been served, and that she had found love in the process. Preston did establish himself in Tropic as an investigator and occasional deputy marshal. His reputation grew as he helped solve disputes and investigated crimes with a thoroughness that prevented the kind of rush to judgment that had nearly cost Delilah her life. The town came to respect and trust him, grateful to have someone so dedicated to justice in their midst. Delilah's dressmaking business flourished. Women came from surrounding towns to commission her work, impressed by the quality and artistry she brought to every piece. She hired 2 assistants to help with the increased workload, young women she trained personally. Preston built them a small house on the edge of town, with a view of the Red Cliffs and room for a workshop where Delilah could create her designs. Their first year of marriage was filled with joy and adjustment as they learned to live together, to share space and dreams and daily life. Preston was patient and gentle with Delilah, aware that her ordeal had left scars not immediately visible. Sometimes she woke from nightmares about the jail cell, about angry mobs and the feeling of rope around her neck. He would hold her through those dark moments, reminding her that she was safe, that he was there, that nothing would ever hurt her again. Delilah, in turn, gave Preston something he had never had, a true home. She created a warm, welcoming space filled with small touches that showed she knew him and loved him. His favorite meals appeared on the table. Books he mentioned wanting to read showed up on his bedside table. She mended his clothes and worried when investigations kept him away overnight, always greeting his return with relief and kisses. Their love deepened and matured, growing from the intense connection forged in crisis to something steadier and more profound. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the ways they each processed emotions and faced challenges. Preston learned that Delilah needed quiet time alone to recharge after socializing. Delilah learned that Preston worked through problems by talking them out, needing her to listen and offer perspectives he might have missed. 2 years after their wedding, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. Preston was overjoyed, already planning how to make their home safer for a child, talking excitedly about teaching their son or daughter to ride. Delilah was nervous but excited, grateful to have Preston by her side for this new adventure. Their son was born in March of 1885, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him James Samuel Navarro, the middle name chosen to honor Preston's father. Preston was a devoted father from the first moment, cradling his son with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. He would sit for hours holding James, talking softly to him about everything and nothing, completely besotted. Delilah watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. She had known Preston was a good man, but seeing him as a father revealed new depths to his character. He was patient with James's crying, attentive to every need, willing to wake in the night for feedings and diaper changes. He sang lullabies in Spanish, songs from his Texas childhood, his deep voice soothing their son to sleep. When James was 6 months old, word came that Jacob Thornton had been hanged for his crimes. Preston held Delilah as she processed this news, the final chapter of the nightmare that had brought them together. She felt no joy in Thornton's death, only sadness that his twisted sense of justice had caused so much pain. But she also felt closure, knowing he could never hurt anyone else. "It's truly over," she said quietly. "It's over," Preston agreed. "Now we focus on our future, on this beautiful life we're building together." And build they did. 2 years after James's birth, Delilah gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Rose. The girls had their mother's auburn hair and a mix of both parents' features. Their household became wonderfully chaotic, filled with children's laughter and the controlled chaos of raising 3 young ones. Preston reduced his investigating work to focus more on his family, taking only cases that could be solved locally. Delilah managed her business from home, designing custom pieces while her assistants handled most of the day-to-day shop operations. Together, they created a life rich in love and purpose. They made a point to take family trips, showing their children the beautiful Utah landscape. They camped by streams, explored canyons, and taught the children to appreciate the wild beauty surrounding them. Preston taught James to ride when he was 7, and the girls followed suit as soon as they were old enough. The sight of their children racing across open land, free and joyful, never failed to move both parents. As the years passed, Tropic grew and changed. More families moved in, drawn by the beautiful location and the promise of fertile land. Preston became an unofficial leader in the community, respected for his fairness and integrity. Delilah's dress shop became a town institution, her designs sought after throughout southern Utah. But through all the changes and growth, the core of their lives remained the same. The love between Preston and Delilah, forged in the crucible of injustice and proved through years of partnership. They never forgot how they met, how close they came to losing each other before their life together truly began. That memory made them cherish each ordinary day, each shared meal, each quiet evening after the children were asleep. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Delilah back to the creek where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Chen, who still doted on the family. It was late spring, the desert flowers in bloom, the air warm but not yet scorching. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked, holding her hand as they walked the familiar path. "The circumstances of how we met, all the pain that brought us together." Delilah considered the question seriously. "I regret the injustice, the suffering of those other women, the fear I felt in that cell. But I can't regret meeting you, loving you, building this life together. I think perhaps some good can come from even the darkest situations. You were my light in that darkness, Preston. You still are." He pulled her close, kissing her with the passion of a young lover and the tenderness of a devoted husband. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting before I met you, defined only by my work, by the people I helped. You gave me roots, a reason to stay in one place, a purpose beyond solving the next case. You gave me everything." They stood there as the sun set, Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from ashes. Their love story had begun with injustice and accusation, with iron bars and mob fury. But it had transformed into something enduring and true, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. When they returned home that evening, their children rushed to greet them. James, now 12 and full of energy, the 8-year-old twins talking over each other to share stories of their day with Mrs. Chen. Preston scooped up Rose while Emma attached herself to Delilah's skirts, and James stood beside his father, already nearly tall enough to reach Preston's shoulder. This was their legacy, Delilah thought as she looked around at her family. Not the terrible circumstances that had brought them together, but the love and life they had created despite those circumstances. 3 beautiful children who would grow up knowing they were cherished, who would learn from their parents' example what it meant to believe in justice, and to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Preston and Delilah sat on their porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Preston's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against his chest. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and desert flowers. "Tell me something," Delilah said softly. "When you rode into Tropic that day, investigating Crawford's murder, did you have any idea that you would find your future wife sitting in that jail cell?" Preston chuckled. "Not even remotely. I was focused on the case, on proving a pattern of crimes. But then I saw you and something shifted. It wasn't love at first sight exactly, but it was recognition, like my soul knew yours before my mind caught up." "I felt it too," she admitted. "This pull toward you, this certainty that you were telling the truth when you said you would prove my innocence. I had given up hope, Preston. Everyone believed I was guilty, and I was starting to wonder if perhaps I was going mad, if somehow I had committed murder and blocked it from my memory. You gave me back my faith in truth and justice. You gave me back my faith in love," he replied. "I had seen too much darkness in people, too much cruelty and selfishness. But you reminded me that goodness exists, that courage and kindness can survive even in the harshest circumstances. You made me want to be better, to build something instead of just solving problems and moving on." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence only possible between two people completely at ease with each other. Finally, Delilah stirred, tilting her face up to look at her husband in the starlight. "I love you, Preston Navarro, more today than yesterday and more tomorrow than today." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I love you, Delilah Navarro, my wife, my partner, my home. Always." Inside the house, James stirred in his sleep, dreaming of the riding lessons his father had promised for tomorrow. The twins shared a room and a bed, curled together like puppies, Rose clutching a rag doll Delilah had made and Emma with her thumb in her mouth, despite their gentle attempts to break the habit. The house was peaceful, filled with the quiet contentment of a family secure in their love for each other. Outside, the Utah night embraced the town of Tropic. The red cliffs stood sentinel as they had for millennia, unchanged by human dramas. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The creek burbled softly over stones worn smooth by countless years of water flow. The desert held its breath in the cool night air, waiting for dawn, and on their porch, Preston and Delilah Navarro held each other close. Two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen to build a life together. Their love story had started with accusation and imprisonment, with a cowboy's determination to prove the unprovable and a woman's courage in the face of certain death. But it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of belief, justice, and love. Years later, when their children were grown and starting families of their own, James would ask his parents to tell the story of how they met. He never tired of hearing it, of understanding how close his family came to never existing at all. Preston and Delilah would share the tale together, finishing each other's sentences, their hands still finding each other across the space between their chairs. "Your father was the only one who believed in me," Delilah would say, her eyes soft with remembered gratitude. "Your mother was the strongest person I had ever met," Preston would add, pride evident in his voice. And the grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, absorbing this family legend about courage and faith and love conquering impossible odds. They would grow up knowing that their very existence was built on a foundation of justice and devotion, that their grandparents had faced darkness and emerged into light together. But all of that was still to come on this quiet night in Tropic, Utah. For now, Preston and Delilah were simply a husband and wife, young enough to have most of their lives ahead of them, old enough to appreciate the precious gift they had been given. They sat under the stars, breathing in the desert air, feeling the warmth of each other's presence, knowing they were exactly where they belonged. The story of how nobody believed Delilah Bennett was innocent, and how cowboy Preston Navarro said, "I know you didn't do it, I'll prove it," became legend in Tropic. It was told and retold, embellished slightly with each telling, but the core truth remained unchanged. A good man had fought for an innocent woman, and in doing so had found the love of his life. It was a story about justice and faith, about refusing to accept easy answers, about the courage to stand alone against a mob's fury. But more than anything, it was a love story. One that began in the worst possible circumstances and bloomed into something beautiful, enduring, and true. One that proved that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. That even when everyone else gave up, one person's belief could make all the difference. That love, real love, could grow in the most unlikely soil and flourish for a lifetime. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Preston and Delilah finally rose from their porch and went inside to their bedroom. They moved through their evening routine with practiced ease, comfortable in their shared space. In bed, they curled together as they had every night since their wedding, Delilah's back to Preston's chest, his arms secure around her waist. "Good night, my love," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Good night, darling," he replied, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Sweet dreams." And they slept peaceful and content, two hearts beating in rhythm, two souls intertwined. The nightmare that had brought them together was long past, transformed into the foundation of a beautiful life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, as every tomorrow did. But they would face it together, as they faced everything together, bound by a love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger than steel. This was their happily ever after, earned through courage and determination, built on a foundation of trust and devotion, sustained by the deep and abiding love between a cowboy who believed in justice and a woman who never gave up hope. It was everything they had dreamed of, and more than they had dared imagine during those dark days when iron bars stood between them. And so they lived, Preston and Delilah Navarro, creating a legacy of love that would echo through generations, a reminder that truth matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that love, true love, can conquer even the darkest circumstances and create a light that never fades.